In 1960, journalists were invited to tour a peaceful American research station buried under the ice in Greenland, scientists studying snow, testing Arctic construction, nothing more. That was the story. Here's what those journalists weren't told: 2.5 miles beneath their boots, the U.S. Army was quietly trying to figure out how to hide 600 nuclear missiles inside the ice sheet itself, aimed directly at the Soviet Union. The base had a public name and a real name. And almost nobody alive at the time knew both. The public name for that Greenland station was Camp Century, and on paper, it really was a scientific marvel. Built starting in 1959, roughly 800 miles from the North Pole, it was a small underground city carved directly into the ice sheet, 21 trenches connected by tunnel, running nearly 2 miles in total length, housing barracks, a hospital, a movie theater, a chapel, and even a shop, all powered by the first mobile nuclear reactor the U.S. military had ever deployed in the field. Soldiers slept, worked, and worshipped under solid ice, in a facility that genuinely did conduct real climate science, including drilling the first ice core ever pulled from the base of the Greenland ice sheet, a sample scientists still study today. That part of the story was true. It just wasn't the whole story. Behind the scenes, at the Pentagon, planners had a much bigger classified ambition, one that wouldn't become public for over 3 decades. And it came with its own name, one deliberately picked to sound unremarkable enough that nobody outside a small circle would ask questions. That classified name was Project Iceworm. And once you understand what it actually called for, Camp Century stops looking like the whole operation and starts looking like just the opening test. The real plan was almost unimaginable in scope. The Army wanted to dig a network of tunnels stretching across 52,000 square miles of the Greenland ice sheet, an area 3 times the size of Denmark, with plans to potentially expand it to 100,000 square miles. Inside that frozen labyrinth, railway tracks would continuously shuttle 600 modified nuclear missiles, nicknamed Icemen, between 2,100 different launch positions spaced 4 miles apart, coordinated from 60 separate launch control centers. The entire concept functioned like a deadly, freezing game of hide-and-seek. If the missiles never stayed in one place long enough, Soviet targeting planners could never be certain where to aim a first strike. Making it all run would have required roughly 11,000 soldiers living full-time under the ice, permanently. Here's the detail that made the entire secret even riskier: the 1951 defense agreement that let America build military facilities in Greenland said absolutely nothing about nuclear weapons. Denmark, which governed Greenland, had a long-standing policy against nuclear weapons on its territory. The U.S. Army had a plan requiring the wholesale conversion of an ally's ice sheet into a hidden nuclear launch platform, and Denmark's own government had no real idea any of it was happening. So what actually stopped Project Iceworm? Not the Soviets. Not the Danish government, which never even got the chance to formally object. Not budget cuts, or politics, or a change of heart in Washington. It was the ice itself. Camp Century had been built on a basic assumption, that the Greenland ice sheet was stable enough to hold a permanent underground city, decade after decade. It wasn't. The ice moved constantly, flowing like an impossibly slow river, and the weight of snow accumulating on the surface pressed down relentlessly on everything built below. Within just a few years, those carefully engineered tunnels began to visibly deform, walls buckling, ceilings sagging, support beams straining under pressure they were never designed to withstand. The tracks meant to shuttle nuclear missiles between launch points would have been slowly crushed by the very ice meant to hide them. Engineers realized, with growing alarm, that if a full-scale missile network behaved the same way, entire sections of a nuclear arsenal could become buried, unreachable, or simply lost under shifting ice, a nightmare scenario for a project literally designed around fast, controlled troop and missile movement. By 1963, Project Iceworm was quietly cancelled. The reactor at Camp Century was shut down and removed by 1964. The camp briefly limped along on diesel power before being fully abandoned in 1966 and 1967. No missile silo was ever built. No warhead was ever installed. The most ambitious secret nuclear project of the Cold War was defeated by something that couldn't be negotiated with, threatened, or outmaneuvered: the simple, physical behavior of ice under its own weight. Here's the part of this story that might be stranger than the missiles themselves. Almost nobody found out what Camp Century had really been for more than 30 years. The base was abandoned in the mid-1960s, its tunnels left to slowly crush and fill with snow, its true purpose buried right alongside it. Project Iceworm remained fully classified until 1996 and 1997, when a Danish research institute, digging through declassified American documents for an unrelated study on Greenland's role in the Cold War, stumbled onto the truth. For the Danish government, and for Greenland's own population, this was the first time anyone learned that the United States had planned, without their meaningful knowledge or consent, to bury an active nuclear missile network beneath their home. Some of the American soldiers who had actually lived and worked at Camp Century said, decades later, that even they hadn't known the word iceworm while they were there. They'd simply been told the Army wanted to test whether a subway-style tunnel system could function under the ice. And the story doesn't end with the reveal. Buried underneath the abandoned camp, sealed in ice that scientists once assumed would stay frozen forever, sits genuinely hazardous waste, chemical, biological, and low-level radioactive material, left behind when the site was decommissioned. For decades, this wasn't considered a serious problem, because nobody expected that ice to ever move again. Climate change has started to change that math. As Greenland's ice sheet gradually thins and shifts under rising global temperatures, scientists have begun modeling when, not if, meltwater could eventually reach that buried waste and start carrying it into the surrounding environment. The Cold War's most secret missile project may end up leaving its final mark not as a military threat, but as a slow-motion environmental question mark, sealed under ice that was never quite as permanent as anyone assumed. There's a strange kind of symmetry buried in this story. Camp Century was publicly sold to the world as a climate research station, and that cover story turned out to be more true than the people running the real operation ever intended. The ice cores drilled there decades ago, originally just a byproduct of testing whether missiles could be hidden underground, are still being studied today, providing genuinely valuable data about the planet's ancient climate. And now, that same shifting, unpredictable ice, the exact quality that doomed Project Iceworm as a weapons platform in the 1960s, is what threatens to eventually expose the waste the project left behind. The Army spent years and enormous resources trying to make the Greenland ice sheet do something it was never built to do: hold still, predictably, forever, so 600 nuclear missiles could hide inside it. The ice never agreed to that arrangement. It kept moving the entire time, on its own schedule, indifferent to Cold War strategy, and in the end, that quiet, patient movement is what may determine this story's real final chapter, decades after the missiles that were never built stopped being the point. A nuclear missile network hidden inside a moving glacier, defeated not by an enemy but by the ice's own physics, and its buried waste might not stay buried forever. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Was Project Iceworm doomed by bad planning, or was it simply an idea that never should have trusted the ice in the first place? Tell me what you think in the comments. This is Unbuilt History. Subscribe, because there's always another secret still frozen somewhere, waiting to be dug up.